Kate Mila Falcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Helen. This is book number 10. Now I'm out of fingers. Book number 10, video number 10 of The Real Marilyn Monroe by Larry Jordan, debunking the myths and revealing intimate new details of her life and death. We have covered 2-hour-long videos every Saturday. This will be the 5th week. Wow, that's astounding. It's a long book, but it's fascinating, and the things that it reveals, really disturbing. So we left off in video 9 with Marilyn returning from a furniture shopping trip to Mexico, where she was thrown together with a lot of suspect people, just people taking advantage of her right and left. And when she got home, healthy and happy and upbeat, her doctor started giving her injections of, what, truth serum? Hard to say. Okay, we're on chapter 29, an increase in intrigue, as though that were possible. Anyway, she was escorted to the Golden Globes by Bolaños. Susan Strasberg called him the gigolo. Marilyn paid for his flight, paid for his hotel, and this was all arranged by her press person, publicist, I guess, Pat Newcomb. She was getting injections from Engelberg right before she went to the event. She got one, and after one cocktail at this event, she was just loopy, and there was a lot of talk about that. She won the Golden Globe for World Film Favorite Female for The Misfits. When she went to accept her award, she was unsteady and slurring. Susan was aghast. She said, Marilyn, it seemed like there was something wrong with her. She was befogged, like she'd been hypnotized. She did not seem like herself, and she'd only had one drink. This was not a romance. She had no interest in Bolaños at all. After the event, she sent him home. While in Mexico, there was a national magazine article that came out about her and published her apartment address, which freaked her out. So when she returned, she stayed with her friend Shelley Winters. She had to move into her unfinished house because she couldn't go back to her apartment. It wasn't safe. She asked Joe DiMaggio to come and help, and when he came to pick her up, Greenson would not let him go upstairs to see Marilyn. This is just getting stranger and stranger. Let's see, what page am I on? So Joe arrived to pick her up, but the psychiatrist refused to allow DiMaggio upstairs to see Marilyn. Learning that Joe was in the house, Marilyn grew increasingly upset, desiring to see him, and began to protest loudly. Was she locked in a room? Was she somehow immobilized? One has to wonder why she didn't just come down the stairs under her own power, unless, of course, Greenson had her too drugged to do that. Fortunately, upon hearing her pleading, Joe once again asserted himself like he had at the Payne Whitney Clinic and brushed past the doctor, bounded up the stairs to literally rescue Marilyn. Greenson angrily turned to a young medical student who happened to be present and hissed that Marilyn was a narcissist and said other hateful things about his patient. This guy's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. That's just incredible. She was so submissive to him that speculation now is she must have had Stockholm Syndrome. This is where there's a bond with your abuser as a coping mechanism because you can't get away from him. Joe helped her to move some stuff, and he stayed a week with her. So Jack was coming to visit Sinatra. Oh, okay. So he was hoping that Sinatra was hoping that his house would become the Western White House. And he even he did renovations in anticipation. And he even put up a plaque for one bedroom that said JFK slept here. getting ahead of himself. But it was canceled at the last minute because of security concerns. And he decided instead to stay at Bing Crosby's house. And Sinatra was appalled because Crosby was a Republican. All of this allegedly was because the brothers were fighting in the Oval Office about this connection between the two of them, between Sinatra and the older brother, that this was at least giving the impression of mob connections and was unseemly, and that's putting a gloss on it. He made some sort of poor excuse, and it made no sense to Sinatra that this was why he wasn't coming. His mob connection was widely public for at least 20 years, and his friendship with Jack had been public for at least 20 years. So all of a sudden, they have compunctions? No. The real story is allegedly what follows. Hoover met with Sam Giancana, with the mob boss, and then he played the tapes that he had. He didn't meet with him. He had spied on him, and he played the tapes that he had for the Attorney General. And in one, Giancana is heard to demand that Sinatra get Jack to honor a deal to back off the mob. So these two brothers are working at cross purposes. Sinatra told Giancana that he was sleeping with Pat Lawford to get her to tell the brothers to back off, and that he said he would sleep with this bee until I get something going. These are lovely people. The AG heard this, and as far as he was concerned, Sinatra was out. Cut him out of their lives. He was banished from the inner circle of the family, and I don't mean the mob family. And in March 22nd of 62, Hoover went to the White House to confront Jack in the private quarters. It was a bitter 4-hour exchange. Hoover warned against cavorting with women like Judith Campbell and Marilyn Monroe. He warned Jack they were all communists, and you're hanging around with the mob, Sinatra. You're hanging around with communists, these women. Later, Jack told his aide that Hoover was out of his mind. He said, Marilyn's not taking marching orders from the Kremlin. You must be kidding me. So despite efforts by some to connect her to the left and to Castro and all that, she would very often, very vocally defended American democracy when she was doing public speaking or in conversations at parties with large groups of people. And in her writing, she gave no indication of anything else. Cuba, the situation there was complicated. There was a revolution to overthrow a bloody military regime, but it turned into a communist government, and Americans' opinions were required to evolve with the changing political system and the morphing politics. What was true in 1960 was not true in 1962. Ed Sullivan, for example, had Castro on his TV show. I always thought this was hilarious. This is just so weird to me. It was viewed by 50 million Americans. He interviewed Fidel Castro on his program. And this was shortly after the 32-year-old lawyer turned revolutionary had defied the odds and overthrown a bloodthirsty military regime in Cuba. Smithsonian Magazine writes, it was the electrifying climax of history's most unlikely revolution. A scruffy handful of self-taught insurgents, many of them just kids out of college, literature majors, art students, and engineers, including a number of trailblazing women, had somehow defeated 40,000 professional soldiers and forced the sinister dictator, President Fulgencio Batista, to flee from the island like a thief in the night. Fidel Castro was described by Ed Sullivan as a wonderful group of revolutionary youngsters, like they were the latest pop music sensation. Despite their scruffy appearance, he said, they were a far cry from the godless communists depicted by the Cubans' military propaganda machine. He pointed out they were all wearing Catholic medals and carrying copies of the Bible. Sullivan even compared Castro to George Washington. The U.S. media at the time were portraying Fidel Castro as a sort of Robin Hood. When he came to America, he was mobbed by fans as he ate a hot dog in New York City, spoke at Princeton, and visited the historic Mount Vernon and the Lincoln Memorial. Kennedy warned Judith Campbell, that Hoover was wiretapping her, and also that they knew that she was a courier between Giancana and Jack. It's just like a book. He didn't stop womanizing, and he even hooked up with Marilyn at the Crosby's house while he was there. Hoover leaked gossip, hints about Campbell, to Walter Winchell, and he did it on purpose as a signal to Jack. Marilyn told her friend Ralph that the gentleman caller wanted to meet at Sinatra's for a rendezvous, but she said, I'm not really sure I want to go. She wasn't heartsick. She wasn't wanting to be the first lady. She was calling her own shots. Reluctantly, she did agree to meet with him at Crosby's house. And she told Ralph that she went in disguise on the plane wearing a black wig with fake ID. And as a joke, she called herself Tony Roberts. His last name was Roberts. The night before she flew to Palm Springs, the AG was at Lawford's house in Los Angeles. And the question is, nobody knows what the two of them did that Friday. Did they hook up in LA? She did juggle both, so it's entirely possible. This is one of the things that people have a hard time reconciling. She didn't mind having flings with married men. She also didn't mind having flings with two married men who happened to be brothers. On Saturday, she flew to Palm Springs in her disguise. They were given privacy, and later that day, Crosby hosted a barbecue. And she gave Jack a lighter with his initials on it because she knew he smoked cigars. It got auctioned off in 2021, and when it was auctioned, they didn't realize what it was they had. They thought it was one of many similar ones that Jack allegedly gave visitors to the Oval Office, and it wasn't until later they found out if it was one of a kind from Marilyn to him. Jack had Salinger, had him, Pierce Salinger, his press secretary, buy out all the Cuban cigars he could find, 1,200 of them. Then he signed a ban on all Cuban exports in the U.S., but he had a private stockpile of illegal Cuban cigars. They're still illegal today. So Kennedy invited her to his birthday party, which was a foolish thing to do, but nevertheless, this was the big scandal. We'll get to that. Marilyn called her friend Ralph and said, I'm with a friend, and he started talking about my walk of all things. Like, I'm with a friend right now, and he started talking about my walk. Outrageous, he said. I told him it took a lot of work to learn it. And she made a bet. Where does the thigh bone connect with the hip bone? So they called Ralph because he was a masseuse, a professional masseuse. Then Ralph could hear laughter in the background. Monroe put the President of the United States on the phone, and Ralph explained the thigh bone is connected, as the song goes, to the hip bone, but into the hip socket. He gave other details. Kennedy laughed and said, well, I take your word. She speaks highly of you. Ralph elaborated that back in the day, Marilyn studied books about how the body connected and how the pelvis and everything worked, and developed her famous walk based on mechanics, body mechanics. So she got away with this tryst by, they got away with this tryst of meeting, and nobody glomming onto it by throwing on purpose at the same time 3 separate elaborate parties for the press corps with tons of free food and alcohol, fancy, free, come and get it. And they were also distracted that they didn't write about, oh, well, where are those two? Jack wrote an effusive thank you to Crosby, and Crosby did not know about the affair. He didn't know that Jack, his house guest, was playing host. He was very uptight. He was a Roman Catholic who once said that he would disown his own daughter if she had sex before marriage. It was a real piece of work. Chapter 30, Something's Got to Give. This was her last contractual film with Fox. Remember, she had to make certain, I think it was 3 films. It's been a while. This was the last one. Once again, the remake of My Favorite Wife with Cary Grant and Irene Dunne. There was a new head of Fox, Peter Levathis. I'm probably mispronouncing it, but so Peter Levathis was a former FBI agent. He asked Greenson to help with Monroe, to intervene, to control Monroe. And it wasn't she was out of control, it's just they wanted to manipulate her. So Greenson interfered with the film. He got all up in the film. He had the producer, Brown, replaced with Henry Weinstein. And there's no relation, I looked it up. Then he replaced the director, Trevia, with George Cukor. Cukor had no choice. He had a contract and he had to abide by it. April 10th of 62, as arranged, Marilyn showed up for makeup and costume tests, and Cukor didn't even bother to show up. Most stars would get all uppity about it, but she took it in stride. She spent 6 hours on camera testing 7 different hairdos, 15 different clothes changes. And after the test, Levathis said this would be the best Monroe picture ever. So keep that in mind at the beginning of this movie. She looked extraordinary, at her best, very happy. These are all quotes from people. The next day, he came to the house, and as this is the story he says, and then we'll talk about the truth. He came to her house and was shocked to find her nude in bed and heavily sedated. The truth is, he showed up uninvited and unannounced at 6 o'clock in the morning. She was still asleep, and she wasn't heavily sedated. She was groggy because she had only just gotten to bed. She'd been doing lines. She was up and in the car by 9:15 for appointments throughout the day, including a photo shoot for Vogue. She looked beautiful. The story that she was drugged and nearly comatose simply wasn't true. She looked absolutely beautiful in these pictures for Vogue. 6 different writers worked on this script, one after another. Marilyn was just disgusted with the script. Apparently it was just dead, lifeless, and she wanted improvements. She was astute, and she had really good suggestions. She wrote them, in the copies of the scripts. It was a bad studio screenplay, and it wasn't her fault, but they blamed her. She was very upset when Nunnally Johnson was fired. I mean, he was like this award-winning, famous scriptwriter. She went to his hotel to talk to him and was able to sneak in. Nobody recognized her. And she came to the desk in disguise, and they let her speak to him on the phone. And he told her on the phone, he says, those guys at the desk probably think you're a call girl. So she started taking on the role of a call girl while standing there. And they sent her up to the room. So she went up to his room and apologized to him and accompanied him to the airport to see him off. There was nothing unseemly going on. She just had a lot of respect for him as a writer. She tried to have good relationship with his replacement, Walter Bernstein, and he called her cordial, very nice. He said it was really interesting when they would work on the script together and she would be talking about her role. She always referred to that character as Monroe in the third person. She didn't say, I say this or I will do this. Monroe, like she really wasn't even Monroe. Um, Monroe wouldn't do this. Monroe wouldn't do that. So it's a persona that she was describing. The script was not ready for filming. And so she went to New York and maneuvered Paula Strasberg into getting on, didn't maneuver Paula herself, but maneuvered a situation with Paula so that Paula could accompany her back to Los Angeles and be on the set of the movie at $5,000 a week. But Marilyn had to pay half of that. Jane Fonda recalls that at lunch, Marilyn gave the Strasbergs $10,000 to go to a Stanislavski festival. Stanislavski is the guy who created their acting method, you know. And so she gave them $10,000 to go to this, which would be the equivalent of over $102,000 today. She was easily talked out of money and stuff, and very generous to a fault, to her own detriment. She ended up having to borrow cash often because she would give away all her cash. And it wasn't that she was cash poor. The studio always owed her money. She always was owed back money from things she'd already done. And she thought that everything that she gave as a gift was tax deductible. That's what she would explain to her secretary and to her tax guy. Oh, don't worry about spending it. She had no idea anything at all about money. This is interesting. I thought this, remember I said that she was intuitive. Here's an example of why I feel strongly about this. She had a final interview with William Weatherby, the reporter. And in the course of the conversation, he asked her what she thought of Kennedy. And she said, JFK will be another Lincoln. Susan Strasberg was definite that Marilyn Monroe had no expectations or desire of interfering with Kennedy's marriage. She just, that was not what she wanted. Finally, she got a script to memorize. And when she got it, instead of being a clean final version of the script, it included all of the different changes that had been made all at the same time. It was a big, confusing mess, a huge mix-up. So Cooker was like a little bit of revenge. He didn't think she should have any say about the script, even though it was in her contract. But they worked on a compromise to jazz it up for her and fix it, as she put it. And they worked on it for a week. And they had a 149-page script, screenplay type situation. It was just a mess. You know, it was just all these different corrections and mushed together. At 3 a.m. on Good Friday, Weinstein she called to Weinstein to call in sick for Monday. Then she had a chauffeur take her on an errand to go pick up a prescription at the pharmacy. Then she didn't use her limo for the next week. This was very unusual. Where was she gone? Was she out of town? What was going on? Fox sent the studio doctor to her home. And the studio doctor said, well, she's here and she's sick. And he warned Weinstein that Greenson was going overseas and would be gone for the post filming time period, and he was a little concerned about leaving Marilyn by herself, but she was sick. She had a virus. She was prone to viruses, and she really was. She had a fever, and I mean, it was legitimate. But she was well enough on Easter Sunday that she had an appointment and got her hair dyed all day. And the question is, was she meeting with Kennedy? Because he was on vacation, and the rumor has it that he was at the Cal Neva Lodge, which was this big hotel place that had secret tunnels and remote cabins and had been used by bootleggers, and it was perfect for a secret assignation. Uh, it has been rumored that she was partying with Sinatra and Lawford and Kennedy and her. Sinatra was too involved with old Joe's many money interests to snub him. And other people in the press say that he spent um, the whole time at Palm Beach. So part of the rumor is he was with her at Cal Neva Kennedy. Part of the rumor was he was with Sinatra partying. Part of the rumor is that he was at Palm Beach. Well, it can only be in one place. So there's obviously one of these stories is not true. Only one of these stories is true. But there were a lot of White House press releases and photo ops that were done while he was in Florida. So he was there most of the time, if not all of the time. When she was being interviewed by William Weatherby, she confessed to him she was having an affair with a married man that lived in Washington, D.C., and it had to be a big secret. So what did they do? Did they get together in Florida while he was on vacation there? Interestingly enough, there was a situation. So they had a big home. The family had a big home in Florida. They didn't stay there. He put Jackie and the children in this big estate mansion away from the family home. And it belonged to a friend's. But he went to the family home. And he went every day to visit his father and spent a whole lot of other time there. So this is this big old wandering house where his father was sick, you know. His wife and children were very conveniently off-site in a big place somewhere else. The question is, what was he up to? He drove himself. He left Jackie at the borrowed house. And meanwhile, Marilyn was completely off the radar and had got all gussied up that weekend. Called in sick, got the doctor to say, oh yes, she's sick. Jumped out of bed as soon as the doctor left, went and got her hair done, and then went off the radar. So did they meet up in Florida? No one knows for sure. It's just speculation, but it's kind of fun to speculate. She returned to the set April 30th in good shape, looking well. Associated Press reporter Bob Thomas, who visited the set of the movie, filed a story that was distributed to newspapers coast to coast. He said, Marilyn has the figure of a starlet, but the unmistakable aura of a star. She was warm and witty. She looked great. This astrologer asked her, did you know that you were born under the same sign as Rosalind Russell, Judy Garland, and Rosemary Clooney? And she said, I know nothing of these people. I was born under the same sign as Ralph Waldo Emerson, Queen Victoria, and Walt Whitman. Greenson left, and off he went, and everybody who had been so concerned, the movie was only delayed one day. And it wasn't really her fault. He left prescription for barbiturates and antidepressants, and the stuff that he left for her was all later taken off the market because it caused dependence and abuse. He was going to Europe to visit Paula's mother, who had had a stroke. His wife wanted to get Greenson away from Marilyn. He was obsessed with Marilyn. By this point, it was really over the top. And Paula believed he was attracted to Marilyn, and he actually admitted it in writing, and it exists. He was in the grip of an erotic obsession. He was also going to a conference for the Frankfurt School in Germany, a Marxist school. Weinstein was annoyed because he knew that Greenson had created a dependence in Marilyn and then kind of abandoned her. She had Walter Bernstein come. Now this is the scriptwriter. She had him come to her house to go over the script. She was proud of her house and she wanted him to like it. He said you could tell that she really wanted approval for what she'd done. She called Paula in New York and asked her to hurry back because she was alone in LA and was lonely. She Paula did, and her sister came and Joe arrived. So all of a sudden she had a house full of people. But it was a support system. They all knew that something was really wrong in this relationship with Greenson. They were glad he was gone. They were relieved, and they were hoping to get her out from under his spell. So while he was gone, Marilyn fired Eunice because she caught Eunice reading her mail. It's really creepy. By this time, Marilyn was on to Mrs. Murray, Pat Newcomb explained. She resented her and wanted to get her out. Naturally, those of us who were close to Marilyn were delighted. The next day, she did a scene for the movie. It took 10 hours, 50 takes, because it was with a dog, and the dog refused to obey its trainer. But it was described that she kept her sense of humor. She was calm. She never got irritated. She did 50 takes. She says, she joked, he's a method actor. He's waiting to be in the right mood. She kept her good mood. She never complained. She was worried about the dog, its well-being. She was not willfully disruptive, as the studio later claimed. The crew were like, she was great. What are you talking about? And not only that, but there are 10 hours of film to prove that. The film editor said that she never acted or looked better, that when he went through the dailies, he couldn't believe it. Wow. Cukor did so many takes that day. People thought he was deliberately trying to provoke her. It seemed antagonistic. He wasted 2 weeks of production and 27 hours of film to complete 9 lines of dialogue for a reunion scene where Marilyn's character sees her young children again for the first time in several years. 3/4 of the 131 takes were identical. He also shot 26 versions of Marilyn's interaction with the little boy who played her son. This is all very suspicious, and it bespeaks deliberate sabotage of the filming process. She seemed to act very natural with the children, and people commented, boy, you could really see the real Marilyn Monroe when she was around children. It just transformed her. Cukor would snap at them. He was mean to the kids, and she would intercede. She would be nice to them and reassure them. She's described as flawless and patient with the children over 30 different takes. And these children, when they grew up, they had fond memories of working with her. Cukor went out of his way to cause problems, and she was privately disgusted at his rudeness to these children. She could not believe it. What was the point of that? The children of stars, like all the celebrities that she knew, all the important people that she knew who had little children, they all remember her fondly, that she singled them out for attention, that she was polite, she was sweet, she was kind, she didn't ignore them and wasn't dismissive and rude to them like a lot of these, narcissistic celebrities were, that she engaged with them. Jack pressed her again to sing at his birthday. So this is becoming, they're putting the pressure on. The studio and the Democrats didn't like the idea. They thought this was unseemly. But he, oh my God. So this is Jack. He sicked an angry and anti-Semitic attorney general on the studio to give her time off and let her come to New York to sing on his birthday. So the White House is calling the studio and saying, you will give her time off and let her come. This was selfish because he knew it was creating problems on the set. And actually, there were a lot more important things going on than just her job. But he was always cavalier and exploitative of women. He didn't care how it affected her career or her public image, if it's what he wanted. Chapter 31, Marilyn JFK at Madison Square Garden. So this appearance would be the last public image of Marilyn Monroe. She spent a fortune to honor his birthday. She hired the costumer, Jean-Louis, to create a dress that only Marilyn Monroe could wear. He got his assistant, Bob Mackie, 22 years old. This was his first big job. He was assigned to design it, but he didn't know who it was for. The dress was made from specially woven silk from France that was so transparent that crystals had to be hand sewn strategically on this dress. The couture cutters came to her house, and she stood naked for hours as the dress was cut to her body. This would be only for her. Nobody else would wear this, or so they thought. Recently, it took a ballet costumer 9 months to make a replica of this dress. It had over 6,000 beads and sequins hand sewn by a team who took a month, and that's a little piece of hell if you can imagine doing that job, sewing beads and sequins on a dress for 9 months. I mean, for a month. The total cost with the shoes, and the book itemizes it, but I, just came to the bottom line. The whole thing with the shoes and the beads and the labor and the fabric and blah, blah, blah. $2,428.83 today would have cost $24,795. And I have to give credit to Larry Jordan here, because I didn't read ahead. I just read that, and I immediately thought, if they only knew, that Kim Kardashian would wear this dress. It's like a sacrilege, like somebody using the Shroud of Turin for a beach towel, So this is what happened, and I went and I got, I went on the computer and I researched it and I got the whole story. And then when I came back, I found that Larry Jordan, in the next part of the chapter, I'd done exactly the same thing. I could have saved myself all that work. He did it for us. But here's the culmination of the research. The dress was bought by a collector, a Canadian billionaire, for $4.8 million, and he put it on display in Ripley's Believe It or Not museum. Kim Kardashian's mother convinced the museum to let Kim wear it to the 2022 Met Gala. She lost 16 pounds to be able to fit into it. It took a lot of convincing, because this dress was cut and sewn only for Marilyn Monroe's body. The arrangement they made is that she got there and she could put it on at the museum and only wear it going up the steps, go inside, and change immediately into the replica dress. But in that walk up the stairs, just wearing it that one time, she did damage to it. The fabric is aged and has lost some of its flexibility, and this will be a big shock to everybody, her body pulled and puckered the seams, and there was a tear along the back closure, and some of the sequins were worn bare. In 2022, Bob Mackie was utterly horrified. He said, "This dress is too fragile for anybody to wear. This is a big mistake. It was designed for Marilyn Monroe, and it should never have been worn by anyone else." It was a tasteless publicity stunt. I guess we don't have to go into what I think about that. How the Kardashian family had become the focus of so much media attention since then, the O.J. Simpson trial. For those who don't know, Kim Kardashian's father was one of the lawyers on the dream team of O.J. Simpson, who got him off. He had been a close friend. Interesting story. He was still married. Robert Kardashian was still married to Kris Kardashian. Kris and Nicole were best friends, OJ's wife. There was a third couple that was best friends with them. What's his name? Oh my God, my mind just went blank. The Olympic guy who later became trans, the father of two of her youngest daughters, Kris Kardashian Jenner, Bruce Jenner. You know, he was married to a woman. Kris was married to her husband, and Robert Kardashian, Kim's father, and OJ was married to Nicole. Nicole was murdered. OJ went on trial. Robert agreed to defend him. Kris divorced him because of that. Then she and Bruce Jenner had an affair, and then they got married and had 2 children. Okay. That's what I know about that situation. So it was considered tasteless, and how the Kardashian family became the focus of so much media attention since the OJ trial, when all they seem to be famous for is being famous, is a sad reflection of how vacuous modern society has become. And I think we're going to need to speak with the author about that. That's one of my favorite beefs. So there was a huge backlash for Kim Kardashian wearing this dress, and they created a new committee to preserve all historical garments. And somebody said this is like driving an extremely rare, one-of-a-kind automobile in a drag race. You would not do this. Kim Kardashian wore it because this is her excuse. Many young fans don't know who Marilyn Monroe was. Ergo, I should destroy her iconic dress. No, I said that. Marilyn was never sewn into it. That's a fallacy. The dress was made to fit her. It had a zipper up the back, and that's what happened. There was, to prevent a malfunction, what they did was she put the dress on, they zipped her up, fit her, because it was designed to fit her. Then they took a couple of little safe stitches along the zipper to prevent it from unraveling, malfunctioning, because this dress was skin tight. So she was able to get in and out of it because it was made exactly for her. It fit her. Between the dress, shoes, hair, makeup, and a donation to the Democratic National Convention, Marilyn spent $7,000 for the event, which would be the equivalent of $71,487 today. This event was put on by a guy called Richard Adler, and he was in constant touch with the White House. And the question remains, who really requested Marilyn to do this performance, to sing Happy Birthday? She wasn't renowned as a singer. She wasn't terrible, and she certainly put on an act, but she was an actor. Why did she come to mind? Who suggested that, I wonder, from the White House? She asked Ralph to meet her at LaGuardia Airport just to have a friendly face. Unbeknownst to her, at the last minute getting on the plane, Peter Lawford showed up and joined her flight at the last minute. And he had already ordered a limo to meet him at the airport and insisted that she go. So she took Ralph aside and apologized. I'm so sorry you showed up for no good reason. And told him, go to my apartment and I'll be there in a few hours. He said she was excited. She was very upbeat and nervous and excited. Fox was angry because, they were strong-armed by the White House. But Fox was angry that she left filming. And they had a breach of contract letter sent to New York, actually to her to freak her out. They were mad at Dr. Greenson for leaving the country because the deal was he was going to keep Marilyn under control. And they were mad at Rudin, Dr. Greenson's brother-in-law, for Marilyn was mad, and she was mad at the doctor, but she was mad at the attorney, and she was mad at the doctor for leaving and at the attorney for not intervening to prevent Fox from sending such a nasty letter. And furious at Weinstein for letting her be the scapegoat for the delays, especially it wasn't her fault that there was no finished script. There was a makeup woman in New York who knew Marilyn well from the Avedon shoots, and she said that Marilyn loved her baby. She had a baby, and Marilyn loved this baby, and confessed to her, to the makeup woman, that she really wanted a baby. And she would often pull out a recorked half bottle of champagne, and this is over a long period of time. It wasn't the same bottle. And it would be unfinished, sitting in the fridge. And the author says, who's an alcoholic or who had a serious problem with alcohol would leave a bottle half finished in the fridge? Not really likely. It's difficult to recork a bottle of champagne. It goes against this whole rumor that's really not true. And she didn't look any the worse for wear. She looked fabulous. So at the rehearsal for this birthday song, there was a lot of concern that her rendition that she was rehearsing was way too sexy. And Richard Adler was absolutely crazed. I thought, oh my God, this is going to be a big, gigantic public spectacle that Marilyn is like hotsy-totsy, sashaying all over the president. So he got Peter Lawford to call Jack, and they said, listen, she needs to tone it down. This is really too much. And the response was, great. He laughed. He thought it was funny. Paula Strasberg had told Marilyn to tone it down, and she refused. She said, how else can I top everybody else? Meanwhile, as she was rehearsing at the Carlisle Hotel, Jack had a visit from Dr. Feelgood. Dr. Feelgood, injection pusher to the stars. That's a whole other story. But he came when famous rich people called and injected them with stuff. We'll see here in a minute. He gets this shot, and shortly thereafter, he starts running down the hall naked. This is Jack Kennedy. And the Secret Service had to sit on him to restrain him. And they had to call a top New York psychiatrist, Lawrence Hatterer. And he was called, and he came in and he said, this is drug-induced mania. What has this guy taken? And it turned out, I guess they tested him, that he'd been given an overdose of methamphetamines, and it makes you crazed, just we all know, right? So the doctor gave him an antidote and stayed with him until the episode passed. But can you imagine? This is the president. Anyway, the AG had a mixture analyzed by the FBI crime lab in June of '62. So this is an example of what many celebrities were getting from Dr. Feelgood. It was a peculiar mixture of methamphetamine, animal hormones, bone marrow, enzymes, human placenta, painkillers, steroids, and multivitamins. And in some cases, even mixtures of his own blood from the doctor. When the AG told his brother, his response was, and I quote, "I don't care if it was made with horse piss, it makes me feel good." This is what the president said. So these shots began in September '60 for him, before the first debates. That's when he started getting them. This doctor went with him to the summit with Khrushchev in Vienna in May of '61. He went to the White House to visit him 34 times between '60 and '62. There's also a record of him going to Hyannis, Palm Beach, and other places in D.C. besides the White House. This doctor, and this is really gross, okay? This is a description of what this guy looked like. He wore a white lab coat with blood spatters on it. His nails were filthy, and his hands were stained with chemicals. His office was really messy and always crowded. You'd have to wait for hours to be seen. In a back room, he'd be mixing up his medicine, sometimes passing the potions over magnets or boiling them in beakers with fluorescent stones. He was absolutely a quack, said one of his nurses later to an interviewer. He was out of his mind. Okay, there's even speculation that high-level officials of the CIA felt that his intake of Dr. Feelgood's elixirs put the office of the presidency, the nation, and perhaps the world in peril, and they took action accordingly. We'll just leave it at that. Several of his other doctors tried to put a stop to all of this. They worked together to wean him off of it, and fortunately they got him off of it and straight right before the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'm going to read you this partial list of celebrity patients because this is utterly mind-blowing. This is Dr. Feelgood, the doctor to the stars. Jacqueline Kennedy, Lauren Bacall, Ingrid Bergman, Van Cliburn, Rosemary Clooney, Marlene Dietrich, Judy Garland, Hedy Lamarr, Alan J. Lerner, Zero Mostel, Elvis Presley, Anthony Quinn, Nelson Rockefeller, Tennessee Williams, Leonard Bernstein, Humphrey Bogart, Yul Brynner, and many more. Popular and all-around nice guy Bob Cummings, if you remember him from his TV show where he was the bachelor. He became so addicted he was unable to care for himself. He married a woman who physically abused him and ended up in a custodial care facility where he died a pitiful death. Ironically, in '62, he had authored a popular book called Stay Young and Vital, in which he offered advice on health. New York Magazine reported that Jacobson, this is Dr. Feelgood, not only shot them up, he taught them how to inject themselves and prescribed them needles so that they could do so. He lost his medical license when he lost a patient, one of the president's own photographers, 47-year-old Mark Shaw, who died of acute intravenous amphetamine poisoning after ironically assembling a book of photos that he dedicated to the doctor. The New York Medical Board began investigating Jacobson and found that the doctor had purchased at least 29.7 pounds of amphetamines in 5 years, enough for more than 100,000 doses a year. It was determined that his speed-spiked vitamin shots contained filthy, putrid, and/or decomposed substances. And John Kennedy Jr., who died in the plane crash, was said to have blamed this doctor, Dr. Feelgood, for giving his mother Jacqueline the illness that killed her. I am going to stop here because this is a gap in the narrative, and this is a long chapter. So this is the end of video number 10. And this is an unbelievable story. It is truly incredible. These people, all these famous people who were just up to all kinds of bizarre stuff. It blows my mind. I mean, I was a child when all this went on, so what did I know? So I hope you're enjoying this. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back. And in the meantime, slunga foil, slancha.